You make no friends in the pits and you take no prisoners. 1 minute you're up $500,000 in soybeans, and the next, boom, your kids don't go to college and they've repossessed your Bentley. Are you with me?
The revolution starts now.
We have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Turn those machines back on!
You are about to enter the Peter Schiff Show.
Show me the money!
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth.
The Peter Schiff Show is on.
I don't know when they decided that they wanted to make a virtue out of selfishness.
Your money, your stories, your freedom. The Peter Schiff Show.
Today's podcast is sponsored by NetSuite, the easy-to-use cloud-based business management software for every aspect of your business. Download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning at netsuite.com/gold. The guide is free to you at netsuite.com/gold. Today's podcast is sponsored by Nutrafol. Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologically recommended hair growth supplement clinically shown to improve visible thickness and strength. Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off on their first month subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com and enter the promo code GOLD.
The Peter Schiff Show.
I'm going to start off today's podcast by talking about what really seems to be the biggest story, and that is Bitcoin and MicroStrategy stock. You know, earlier today, Bitcoin hit another new high. It was above 94,000. As I'm recording this podcast here on Tuesday evening, it's back down closer to 92,000. So it's given back a little bit. But at 94,000, not only was it a record high, but it was a record high priced in gold. And I remember not too long ago, I didn't think that we'd see a new record high. Now, we barely eclipsed the high from 3 years ago. So, you know, Bitcoin's really gone sideways over those 3 years. And it may, in fact, be putting in a double top up in this area with respect to the price of gold. But who knows? I mean, there seems to be a lot of momentum right now in this move. I think it's entirely related to Donald Trump winning. And I said this before the election, that I thought that Trump winning would be bullish for Bitcoin, at least in the short run. And I thought that had Trump lost, which was not the outcome I expected, but I knew it was possible, I thought Bitcoin would have, gone way down. I'm sure it would have been. I think had Trump lost the election, I think Bitcoin might be below 50,000 by now. Who knows? Maybe considerably below. But instead, it's moving the other way based on all this enthusiasm regarding the many promises that were made by Donald Trump and some of his cabinet picks, like, Robert Kennedy Jr., who was very pro crypto. And, we don't know how much of that is genuine or how much of that was just pandering to the Bitcoin community when he needed their money to finance his campaign and they needed their votes. Again, I've mentioned this before. It was a very easy political decision, not only for RFK, but for Trump to get a lot of votes and a lot of support, particularly, again, among young people. That's generally where the Republican candidates lose. The young vote tends to lean left. There's an old saying, if you're not a liberal by the time you're 22, you don't have a heart. If you're not a conservative by the time you're 28, you don't have a head. Well, a lot of 22-year-olds are buying Bitcoin, and Trump got their vote. And he got their vote by pandering to their most important issue, which was getting rich off their Bitcoin. And so I always thought that the promises that were made would not be kept. I mean, it's kind of par for the course in American politics. You promise everything to get elected, and then you got to screw over the people who you promised. And so I thought, and I still think, that a lot of these promises won't be kept. But right now, the Bitcoin community is very optimistic about Bitcoin. Trump said he wants Bitcoin to be, or America to be, the Bitcoin capital of the world. He said, I want Bitcoin to be made in America and stuff like that, which is all a bunch of nonsense because who cares about where Bitcoin is made? It doesn't do anything. I was listening to an interview with Michael Saylor, and he's talking again about Bitcoin and how it's digital energy. I mean, he's not even really saying it's digital gold anymore. He's saying, well, it's digital energy. And I, always get a kick out of that as if it's some kind of battery that you could plug into things and power them with your Bitcoin. But when he started talking about digital energy, he also said, imagine what would happen if we eliminated all of the crude oil in the world. And imagine a world without crude oil, we'd have mass starvation. And so that's supposed to imply that, we really need Bitcoin because we need crude oil. I mean, imagine a world without Bitcoin. Nothing would change. I mean, if Bitcoin disappeared from the planet today, nobody would notice. I mean, except the people who own it and expect to get rich off of it. But it wouldn't impact most people's lives at all. I mean, nothing would change. I mean, there's nothing that Bitcoin has changed other than the malinvestment of resources. Lots of resources have been used building up blockchain, crypto, Bitcoin. All this stuff is malinvestment. It's all a complete waste. And it's unfortunate that now that Donald Trump is behind this, we're wasting even more of our resources on this nonsense. But at the same time, I was looking at a report, and China is investing $1.2 billion building this mega port in Peru. And the significance of this port, and there's nothing like it right now in South America, is it's a deep water port, and it's going to be able to accommodate these huge container ships that are capable of making the trip all the way to China nonstop. See, the way it's working now, because they don't have the capabilities, when China is trading with South America, a lot of the freight is moving through Mexico or California, Long Beach, where, it goes from China to Long Beach on a really big ship. Then they unload the stuff and they load it on a smaller ship and they send it down to, a port in South America. And so what China's trying to do is reduce the cost by just having one ship, and also cut out Long Beach, right? Take away that port business from the United States. At the same time, they are building up the rail infrastructure between that port and Brazil. So China is using its money and resources to build up this shipping and supply channel so that it could do a lot more business more efficiently with South America, cutting out the United States. And also, to the extent that China can develop a better trade route with South America, which has tremendous resources that China needs. There's a lot of trade that can be done between China and South America, where the South American countries are actually making stuff that China needs. So they don't have to loan the Brazilians the money to buy their stuff. They pay for the Chinese stuff with their own stuff. It's more a balanced trade relationship. But to the extent that they're building out these trade routes, it makes it easier for China to be less concerned about the United States, preserving that market, propping up the value of our currency. We're concentrating on Bitcoin. We got a $1 trillion plus merchandise trade deficit. The merchandise that we don't need to produce is Bitcoin, right? We can't, the Chinese don't want that. We can't trade that for all of our imports, but this is this massive misallocation. And one of the reasons that this is really happening is because of what's going on with MicroStrategy, which is really why I wanted to also talk about that on today's podcast. So I mentioned about 3 weeks ago, a little less, when Michael Saylor made this announcement. He announced to the world that MicroStrategy was going to buy $42 billion worth of Bitcoin, which is a lot of money to spend on nothing, right? $42 billion. $21 billion was going to be paid for by selling stock in MicroStrategy and then using the money that he got from the stock sale to buy the Bitcoin. The other 21 million was going to be issuing convertible notes, which amount to debt, but give the holder the option to convert to equity. And so borrow that money. And of course, the reason it's 21 million is because there's 21 million Bitcoin. There's nothing scientific about that number. It's all symbolic. But again, if Michael Saylor really wanted to buy $42 billion worth of Bitcoin, the last thing he would do is announce that to the world. I mean, why would you want to put that out there, before you actually bought it? I mean, if the goal is to buy as many Bitcoin as cheaply as possible, the last thing you would want to do is let everybody know how much you want to buy. Because obviously, the minute you put that out there, people who might have sold their Bitcoin are going to hold on to it. Oh, I don't want to sell my Bitcoin now. MicroStrategy is going to buy all this Bitcoin. I'll sell it later after they push up the price. And of course, if you announce this, other people might think, hey, if MicroStrategy is going to buy $42 billion worth of Bitcoin, I want to buy mine now. I want to get in there first. I got to front run this massive buy order because, I'll be able to sell out later. But the reason that Michael Saylor announced this plan was because he wanted it to push the price of Bitcoin higher. That's the entire business model of MicroStrategy, is to get the price of the Bitcoin that they own to go up. Because the higher the price of Bitcoin, the higher the price of MicroStrategy stock, which is the direct function of the price of Bitcoin. And the higher the price of MicroStrategy stock, the easier it is for Saylor to sell that stock to buy even more Bitcoin. And as he buys more Bitcoin, again, that pushes up the price of his stock, which lets him sell more. So it's a self-perpetuating spiral that is all dependent on the price of Bitcoin going up. So the goal of MicroStrategy, of Michael Saylor, is a higher Bitcoin price. That's why he let everybody know what he intended to do. Now, on Monday, he announced that MicroStrategy had already bought, I think, 6.7 billion worth of Bitcoin. And I annualized the pace over the last 3 weeks. And if MicroStrategy continues to buy Bitcoin at the same pace, the entire 3-year, $42 billion purchase will be completed in under 4 months. And in fact, I think just today they announced another 1.7 billion. That's going to be a convertible debt. They're selling that now. And they're really trying to buy this 42 billion worth of Bitcoin as fast as they can, right? They're not waiting over that period of time. Now, MicroStrategy stock skyrocketed today on the news that they're buying more Bitcoin, that they already bought more Bitcoin. I think the average price of the Bitcoin that they bought on this latest round, which was its biggest buy, it's like 4 billion plus in one crack, was about 88,000. Now, of course, they're up on that buy on paper now, because the minute they announced that they bought all this Bitcoin, Bitcoin goes up. And now MicroStrategy, it was up like 14% today, an all-time record high for the stock. Stock's got a market cap now of over $80 billion. Not only did MicroStrategy surpass Newmont Mining, I mentioned its market cap not too long ago, and I pointed out that MicroStrategy is bigger than all but one gold company, which was Newmont Mining. Now, not only is it bigger than Newmont, which is the biggest gold mining company in the world, its market cap is bigger than the combined market caps of Newmont and Barrick Gold, which is the world's second biggest mining company. So those two mining companies together that have huge earnings and own all sorts of gold, lots of real resources in the ground, they're worth less than MicroStrategy, which mines nothing, doesn't even mine the Bitcoin. It just buys Bitcoin. That's its entire business strategy, is borrowing money to buy Bitcoin. I mean, what the hell do you need MicroStrategy for? You could buy your own Bitcoin. You could borrow money and buy Bitcoin. The only thing MicroStrategy can do better is it could borrow money cheap to buy Bitcoin. So if you want to buy Bitcoin on leverage, you could do it better through MicroStrategy for now. MicroStrategy is going to lose that. The main reason that MicroStrategy is able to do this is because a lot of big investors are convinced that they can get the upside of Bitcoin without the downside by doing the convertible notes. Because you buy these convertible notes, if Bitcoin crashes, you don't lose any money in theory because you just ask for your money back and MicroStrategy has to give it back. But if Bitcoin goes way up and MicroStrategy stock goes way up, well, you just exercise, get your stock, and you have a huge profit. The problem is if Bitcoin crashes, MicroStrategy is not going to be able to pay back the convertible notes because it already wasted the money buying Bitcoin. But as long as Bitcoin is going up, it's able to keep the pyramid going. But I think at some point, as MicroStrategy gets more and more levered and buys more and more Bitcoin at ever higher prices, lenders are going to realize that there's too much risk in this convertible debt, that it's not this safe way of playing Bitcoin, because the higher the price goes and the more leverage MicroStrategy has, the smaller the price drop has to be in order to bankrupt the entire company. Right now, the company's got about $30 billion worth of Bitcoin. Its cost basis is about $15.5 billion. So its average price is about $50 billion. So they keep averaging up. At one point, their average price was about $30 billion. Now it's about $50 billion. And so they're averaging up as they buy into this market. But the market cap of MicroStrategy is over $80 billion. So the company is worth almost 3 times the value of the Bitcoin it owns. And that's basically its entire business. I mean, forget about the software company. They're losing money. So it doesn't even matter that there's an actual business buried underneath this leverage mountain of Bitcoin. Their business is buying Bitcoin. And in fact, now more companies, look, this Mara came out today and announced that it's going to be borrowing $700 million so it could buy more Bitcoin. I mean, more and more American companies think, hey, this is the business I want to be in. I want to be in the leveraged Bitcoin business because look at how high the price of MicroStrategy stock is going. Look at how rich Michael Saylor is getting buying Bitcoin and levering it up, right? And so this is an example here of a misallocation of resources because now capital is being attracted to this mania because that's where the money is being made. Even though no real goods or services are being produced, paper profits are being produced, and that's enough to get the interest of a lot of investment capital that is being misallocated and that should have been put to productive use. Instead, it's being wasted producing nothing. Anyway, we got a quick commercial break. We'll be right back. As a business owner, I know the challenge of navigating unpredictable markets, interest rates, and inflation. That's why having the right tools are essential. NetSuite streamlines operations and scales with growth. Over 40,000 businesses have already future-proofed their businesses with NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 cloud ERP. NetSuite brings accounting, financial management, inventory, and HR into one fluid platform. With one unified business management suite, there's one source of truth, giving you the visibility and control you need to make quick decisions. With real-time insights and forecasting, you're peering into the future with actionable data. When you're closing the books in days, not weeks, you're spending less time looking backwards and more time on what's next. Whether your company is earning millions or even hundreds of millions, NetSuite helps you respond to immediate challenges and seize your biggest opportunities. NetSuite is the platform that I would choose, and you should too. Speaking of opportunity, download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning at netsuite.com/gold. The guide is free to you at netsuite.com/gold. That's netsuite.com/gold. Anyway, I'm talking about the absurdity of what's going on in Bitcoin and with MicroStrategy stock. And, what may be even more absurd about the absurdity is that nobody is talking about it. Nobody is pointing it out. I mean, I've never seen anything like this. I mean, yes, it's been going on for some time and building, but at this point, there should be people calling this out at what a ridiculous bubble this is. I went on Chat GPT. I guess I could have got on Grok, but I've still been doing a lot of Chat GPT. And, I wanted to know, who's talking about this other than me? Like, I know I'd talk about it, but I want to know, is anybody pointing out the absurdity of what's going on and the risks of wasting so much capital on such an enormous bubble. The whole idea that Bitcoin fixes everything. These guys are now talking about how we're going to solve our deficit problems with Bitcoin. How do you solve the deficit problems with Bitcoin? If the government buys Bitcoin, it's got to go into debt to do it. Although they're talking about selling our gold to buy Bitcoin, you might have to sell all of our gold. I mean, it's the countries that would be buying our gold. It would almost be an act of treason for the government, the president, to sell our gold in exchange for Bitcoin. I mean, it's like, selling the cow for magic beans, although I guess in Jack and the Beanstalk, the magic beans actually worked. But in reality, you'd be conned. And so it doesn't solve the problems. It actually makes them worse. The more resources we waste on crypto and Bitcoin, the worse the economy gets, the bigger the deficits will get, the higher inflation will be. I mean, it's not going to cure any of the problems that the U.S. economy has. It actually helps to make them worse. But, it clearly benefits the people who own Bitcoin, who sell it at the expense of everybody else who gets stuck buying it, either because they bought it themselves or because they had no choice, because the government bought it for them. But I wanted to know, is anybody prominent? Is anybody out there like criticizing this? Or is it just going on and everybody's just accepting that this is real? And so I asked ChatGPT, are any prominent figures out there who are criticizing what's happening now with Bitcoin? And it comes back and says, well, there's Peter Schiff. And then it went and told me a lot about myself. And that was it. I mean, it only came up with me. So then I had to say, well, anybody else other than Peter Schiff? Is anybody else saying anything? And it didn't come back with anybody other than it said, like Janet Yellen, Elizabeth Warren. There wasn't anybody from the investment community or from academia or, Wall Street. No, nobody was pointing out the absurdity of what is going on here. And, they parade all these crypto people, including Michael Saylor, on these financial networks. And he, talks about his nonsense about $10 million, $20 million Bitcoin as his, a bearish case scenario, whatever it is. But they think that all the governments in the world are going to follow America's lead into buying Bitcoin. All the companies are just going to buy Bitcoin. So that's all we're going to do. We're just all going to buy Bitcoin. And then that's it. What about anything else? So I think that this is just going to be a complete disaster when it ends. And as I said before, the only way it ends is with MicroStrategy going bankrupt. I don't see how this can end any other way other than the bankruptcy of this company, because their whole business model means they got to keep pushing up the price of Bitcoin and borrowing money to do it. And the minute they run out of the ability to borrow money, then the whole thing collapses, because they are the big buyers. And without them, this whole thing collapses. Now, I know they're hoping that the U.S. government becomes the next biggest buyer to bail out MicroStrategy. I don't think that's going to happen. I just don't think that Trump is going to sell out the country in that respect. And so I think that the people who are buying it now are going to be the bag holders, and the people who think they're doing it low risk by buying MicroStrategy are going to end up getting wiped out as well. Anyway, I wanted to also mention something too about gold, because I was looking at these statistics just to put everything in perspective. When we left the gold standard, in 1971, Nixon had devalued the dollar twice. It was $35 an ounce. And there were a couple of devaluations before we actually, cried uncle and just closed the gold window. But the official gold price is still $42.22. That's what's on the books. Now, the market price of gold is a little bit better than $2,600. It's actually been rising here last couple of days. It was up about $50 yesterday, up another $20 today. So right now we're about $26.35. But we're still well off the highs that we hit before Trump. We got closer to 2,800. We got 2770-ish. I forget exactly where we were. But the market price of gold is a lot higher than the official price. Now, since we went off the gold standard about 1971, the money supply has increased by about 8,500%. I mean, 22 trillion or something like that. So we've had an explosion in the money supply that has far outpaced the increase in the gold price. So if we were to return to a gold standard today so that the dollars were backed proportionately by the same amount of gold that they were backed by in 1971, right? We would have to revalue the gold price above $80,000 an ounce. That just shows you how badly the dollar has been devalued ever since we severed the link to gold. And to go back on a gold standard would require $80,000 gold. That would be the new price, right now at 2,600. So gold has a long way to go if we are to ever go back on a gold standard. Now, there are people say, well, why be on a gold standard? Just be on a Bitcoin standard. The Bitcoin standard isn't going to work, but the government is no more likely to want to go to a Bitcoin standard if somehow it had to have Bitcoin backing all of its money, because the government doesn't mind, create Bitcoin either, just like it doesn't create gold. It has to get the gold, but it's not going to move. We're not going to move to that standard. That's absurd. But it also shows you the argument that, well, gold, it's all a monetary premium. It's not. Gold is trading for, barely above the cost of, mining it still. Yeah, finally, we got, a few $100s. It costs a lot of these gold mining companies $1,600, $1,700, $1,800, $1,900 to mine an ounce of gold, and they're selling it for $2,600. So it's not a hugely profitable business yet, because gold is still ridiculously cheap relative to the supply of money that exists. But it shows you what the government was able to do once it was no longer disciplined by gold. That's why the government has grown so big. That's why the debts have grown so large, because what was preventing all that was removed. And the Bitcoin crowd says, see, that's an example of gold's failure, because gold failed to do its job. No, gold did its job perfectly. It was the government that failed to stay on the standard. The government went off the gold standard, and the courts allowed it. The public allowed it. While we were on a gold standard, government was held in check. Now, yes, we started to veer off that in the 1960s with the war on poverty and the Great Society. And then the market tried to discipline us. Europeans, de Gaulle in France, started to ask for their gold back, right? So the market forces were going to work. They were going to rein in government spending and excess deficits. Otherwise, we would have lost all our gold and the dollar would have imploded. But rather than obeying the market forces, we just abandoned the gold standard. That's not a failure of gold. That's a failure of people, men, women. It's a failure of government. The government refused to adhere to the gold standard because the gold standard was doing exactly what the founders wanted, which was limiting the ability of the government to expand. And that's also one of the things that was about the taxing powers. Not only was the government not given the authority to print money, like I went over in the last podcast, but their taxation was limited to excise taxes, indirect taxes, like tariffs, sales taxes. They did have the ability to levy a direct tax, but it was thought that that would only happen in an emergency like a war, which is why they made it so difficult to impose, because they made it subject to the rule of apportionment, which is extremely difficult to do, and the government never does it. And that's, ultimately led to the amendment of the Constitution. But it was the people that couldn't abide by these laws. And so Bitcoin doesn't do anything to change that. And Bitcoin can't provide that function anyway, because it's not real money. It doesn't have real value. It is nothing. I was looking at this a little video. I did this a debate not too long ago with Jack Mallers, and I saw him. He put a little video up about why Bitcoin was the most valuable thing there is in the history of the world. And he said, because it's limited in supply. He said every other item, every other asset, every other good has a flexible supply. If there's more demand, the market can supply more to meet that demand. He said, so if People want more hamburgers. He said McDonald's can make more hamburgers, but we can't make more Bitcoin, which may be true, but at least you can eat a hamburger. If people are hungry, they need food, right? Nobody needs Bitcoin, right? If people stop wanting it, it doesn't matter that there's 21 million. And it's not the only asset that has a limited supply. There are plenty of other cryptos of the 20 plus thousand that exist that have the same feature, that have a cap, that have an artificial imposed cap. They follow the same protocols, right? It was an open source, thing. It wasn't like proprietary. There are copycats out there. Sure, they don't have all of the computer power behind them, but the thing is the same. You still have a limited supply, and it's not like they can't create more of them. So it's just ridiculous the way they talk about it. It's Michael Saylor. It's like Satoshi is almost like a god to this guy, a deity, and he's like a disciple or a prophet, trying to get everybody on and convert as many people into the cult as possible, so that more people will buy. So this is going to be, as I said, just a complete disaster. It's frustrating to watch it go on because I know what a big waste it is, and and it's an unfortunate byproduct of the election of Trump and the things that he said to get elected. Anyway, there's a couple more things too that I wanted to talk about, but I know we got another commercial, so let me take that break and we'll be right back. Today's podcast is sponsored by Nutrafol. Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologically recommended hair growth supplement, clinically shown to improve visible thickness and strength. Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off on their first month subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com and enter the promo code GOLD. The holiday season is approaching, bringing joy and excitement, but also longer to-do lists, endless parties, indulgent treats, travel stress, and seasonal colds. What you might not realize is that all these things can take a toll on your hair health. Adding Nutrafol to your daily routine now can help improve your hair health heading into the new year. Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologically recommended hair growth supplement brand, trusted by over 1 million people. See thicker, stronger, faster-growing hair with less shedding in just 3 to 6 months with Nutrafol. While many supplements rely solely on ingredient studies, Nutrafol clinically tests final formulations to ensure their efficacy. In a clinical study, 72% of men saw more scalp coverage after taking Nutrafol men's hair growth supplement for 6 months, and 86% of women saw improved hair growth after taking Nutrafol women's hair growth supplement for 6 months. With a Nutrafol subscription, building a hair growth routine is simple. Purchase online, no subscriptions required, automated deliveries, and free shipping keep you on track. Plus, you can save up to 20%. You'll have access to free naturopathic doctor consults, and a Headspace membership is included. The cold, dry air of winter can be unforgiving, but your hair doesn't have to suffer. For a limited time, Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com and enter the promo code GOLD. Find out why over 4,500 healthcare professionals and stylists recommend Nutrafol for healthier hair. Nutrafol.com, spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code GOLD. That's Nutrafol.com, promo code GOLD. And I want to talk about some of the other overlooked aspects of some of the things that people are anticipating from the Trump administration. There's a lot of talk about RFK Jr. and the role that he's going to have, and the impact he's going to have on the pharmaceutical industry, on the food industry. His promise was to make America healthy again. And, I think it's certainly a noble goal for Americans to be healthier and live longer and spend less money on healthcare, because we spend so much money on healthcare, again, predominantly because of the government. And that's why we spend so much on it. But focusing on the food, right? Yes. I mean, he is a proponent of healthy food, organic food. He doesn't like, the processed foods with all the additives and other ingredients, the way food is grown, all the pesticides, and then the preservatives, and all the things that are in the food that are not the healthiest way to eat food. But the reason that food is processed the way it is and grown the way it is and all these additives and preservatives are there, it's all about lowering the cost. And so to the extent that you're going to eliminate all that and you're going to eat, organic, healthy food, it's going to cost a lot more to grow it, make it, deliver it. So you can do that right now. I mean, we eat a lot of healthy stuff. I don't eat a lot of these or any of these really processed foods or fast foods, but it costs a lot more money. And so to the extent that we're going to impose rules and regulations that are going to mandate that food be healthier and that a lot of these processes or ingredients not be used, we're going to be forcing Americans to pay a lot more money for groceries. I mean, maybe double what they're paying right now. I mean, it's another reason that a lot of the CPI stuff, when you go back and you compare over longer periods of time and you're looking at prices, it's apples and oranges on the quality. I mentioned McDonald's. When they first opened up these McDonald's restaurants, before Roy Kroc got involved, I think they opened them up in the 1940s out in California somewhere. And even in the early days of Kroc and stuff, all the food, all the ingredients were fresh at McDonald's. Not anymore. It's all processed and shipped in. And I mean, there's no real ice cream in those shakes. I mean, imagine, I don't even know what the hell's in those patties anymore. But they arrive, they're frozen, they get, they don't make the burgers fresh. They don't, take potatoes, like they had actual potatoes and they would cut them up in the early days and they would make the French fries fresh on the premises, right? So if they had to make, McDonald's food today, the way they made it in the 1940s, yeah, I'm sure they'd have to double the prices. They may have to triple the prices. I mean, I'd like to taste. I'd probably eat a McDonald's burger that was made in the 1940s. It's probably pretty good. I mean, I know the kids like the ones today, but I don't want to eat those things. But so there's a cost here that everybody is overlooking. We're struggling. Americans are up to their eyeballs in debt now. They can't afford the processed food that they're eating. They're putting that on a credit card. So where's the money going to come from to have everybody eat healthier food, right? No one talks about any of this. Now, yes, could we save money in the long run on our healthcare costs? Sure, but potentially. But in the short run, prices are going to go up at a time where people are already struggling with the prices we have right now. The same thing with this deportation of the illegals, which now, we're talking about, are we going to have an emergency, executive order, or, how are we going to start deporting all these illegals? And, sure, it's great on the campaign trail to talk about, getting rid of the illegal aliens, right? Because, sure, I mean, people aren't supposed to be breaking the law to come into the country, right? You're criminals, right? If you're breaking the law. And when times are bad, and which they are bad, right? For most people, times are bad. That's why Trump was elected. That's why I said he was going to get elected. It's always easy to blame the immigrants for the problems, right? You look for a scapegoat, right? The immigrants are taking your jobs, right? The immigrants are committing the crime, right? Just bash all the immigrants. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't immigrants that are committing crimes. Of course there are. But there's plenty of crimes committed by native-born Americans, right? Are immigrants coming in and going on welfare? Yeah, but so are native-born Americans, right? So either one of them is bad as far as I'm concerned. But, it's very easy to bash the illegal immigrants, especially when so many of them have come in, right, under Biden. And the ones that have caused problems are the ones that are on the headlines, right, when they kill somebody. But there are a lot of illegals that don't make the headlines because they don't break any laws. They're actually breaking their backs, doing a lot of hard work. And so if we're going to just go out there and get rid of the illegals, we're going to be getting rid of a lot of people that have been contributing to society, right? Yeah. If we were only going to get rid of the criminals, yeah, that's a no-brainer. Let's get rid of the rapists and the murderers and the people that are, just living on welfare. But that's not how it works. We end up getting rid of a lot of people speaking about food, a lot of those workers are in farms helping to grow food. Now, what happens if they're not there anymore? I mean, who are we going to hire to replace them? It's very difficult to hire a lot of legal Americans. They don't want those jobs. The government gives them a better deal. So in order for the farmers to get the labor, they're going to have to offer much higher wages, which might be, okay, that's good for the Americans who get those higher paying jobs. But now the people who buy the food, they're going to have to pay much higher prices. Now, one of the reasons that Trump was elected was because people were fed up with paying high prices and they wanted relief. Well, they're not going to get relief if, the farms are forced to hire much more expensive labor. But, also a lot of married women that have to work, unfortunately, they have young kids, they have to work. They hire illegals to watch their kids. I mean, that was very prominent when I lived in California. When I was young, almost everybody had a live-in housekeeper, and they were usually illegal. I mean, but the fact that these housekeepers were there provided a lot of flexibility for the moms, because now they could go out and get a job. And one of the reasons was they didn't have to pay the housekeeper that much money. And of course, the housekeepers, they got free room and board. That was a big deal, right? But if they couldn't hire these illegals, they may not have been able to afford legal help at a price that would make it worthwhile. Because remember, if you are going to go out and work, if you're a married woman and you're going to go out and get a job and your husband's already working, you're in a pretty high tax bracket, right? Because you have the combined income. You can't deduct the expense of the child care, but you pay taxes on the money you earn. So by the time you pay the taxes on the money you earn, and then you pay for the child care out of the money you have left, you don't really make that much money working. And so there are a lot of people who work only because they have an illegal. And these are legal people that are able to work and they're doing higher value jobs. So it's going to be a lot more difficult than people think to take a lot of labor that is benefiting a lot of people and just get rid of it. Right? So everybody's like, oh, we're going to have all this efficiency. No, there's a lot of efficiency that we lose when we get rid of the people who have been providing it. So people are just forgetting about all this as they're just talking about the Department of Government Efficiency. And now I hear more talk, from Ramaswamy, and we're going to eliminate these departments. No, you're not. I mean, you don't have any authority to eliminate anything. I mean, how much did the Grace Commission eliminate? I remember what was, the guy, it was not just Peter Grace, but I'm trying to remember the guy's name. But he really, really worked for Pete Peterson. Pete Peterson was really his committee. They were recommending for years and years and years, right? That commission, how to cut government, ways to cut government, ways to make government more efficient, things to cut. Everything they recommended, everything they proposed was completely ignored by the U.S. government. And the DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, has no more authority than they did, and they weren't able to achieve anything. And so I don't think you're going to get anything, coming out of this committee. But now you have a lot of optimism, but people are ignoring a lot of the other problems. One thing I wanted to talk about, I've been meaning to talk about this for a while, and I just keep not having enough time on my podcast. So I just haven't been able to talk about it because, I spent a lot of time talking about what's going on here in the U.S., and I know I have an international audience, so I like to once in a while talk about what's going on in other countries, but it also is a good example about what's happening here. So earlier in October, so about a month ago, a little over a month ago, the UK government passed the Labor Bill of Rights. And remember, the bums that they threw out in the UK were the Tories, right? That are their version of the Republicans, right? And they went left to the Labor Party. And so they, came up with this Labor Bill of Rights. Now, part of the problem of democracy is that you pander to where the voters are. It is much easier to be an employee than an employer. And as a result, there are a lot more employees than employers, right? Most people just sign the back of a check. They never sign the front of the check, right? Now, when you are a politician and you're counting votes, whose votes do you want? The employees or the employers? Well, of course, you want the employees. That's what keeps you in power, right? If you just get the votes of the employers, you're going to lose to the guy who gets the employees. So you always pander to the employees by claiming that you're going to give them something for nothing. And so one of the things they always want to do is say, hey, we're going to put all these requirements on your boss, your greedy, lazy, rich boss who is exploiting you. We are going to force them to give you stuff, right? And that's the reward for voting us into power, is we're going to use the power of government to force your employers to give you stuff that you otherwise would not have. So I just wanted to talk about some of the mandates of this Workers' Bill of Rights, just to go over how they work and how they backfire. See, the problem is when the government does this, when the government punishes employers for hiring people, they hire fewer people. They do whatever they can to avoid hiring people. And that's especially dangerous now when you have automation that's gaining more popularity. You have artificial intelligence. This is not the time where you want to create added incentives not to hire people or to fire the people you got by imposing these type of requirements, because we should want people to create jobs, to provide jobs. And so the last thing government should be doing is making it more difficult, more expensive, and less desirable for the people who create the jobs to actually do it, right? So one of the mandates is flexible work hours, that the government is going to mandate that all jobs have a flexible schedule. Now, how are you supposed to do that? You know, there are some jobs that an employer may determine, I can't have flexibility here. I have a rigid requirement. These are the hours that must be worked. I can't have people coming and going and working from home. They need to work. This is what I need. And I need to hire somebody that is willing to provide what I need. And, you know, if there's not as many people that, you know, can work a rigid, non-flexible schedule, I'm going to have to pay higher wages. But let the market sort that out, right? An employer says, this is the type of schedule I need. Who wants the job? But when the government says, no, you can't do that, you have to offer a flexible schedule, even if that makes your business less efficient and less productive. Well, that's what they have to do. And now the business is not going to operate as efficiently as it otherwise would have. And of course, you now put added pressure on that employer to try to automate, or maybe he can outsource. Maybe he can find somebody, you know, in India as opposed to in the UK who can work a rigid schedule from another country, right? Maybe he doesn't have to be in person, but maybe I need somebody to work this particular schedule every day, no flexibility. And if it's illegal to hire somebody in the UK, even if they may want to, right? If you have that schedule, if I'm not allowed and they could just tell me whenever they want, hey, by the way, I'm taking this time off, then you're just not going to hire. So that's going to make it, harder to get jobs. One of the ones I thought was pretty bad was on suing your employer if they fire you, right? Which again is always, people don't work out, right? They get fired. I mean, most employers, they don't want to fire their workers, especially if they've invested money in training the workers, right? They want to keep them on the job. So if an employer is firing somebody, they have a good reason for doing it, right? I mean, they need to do it, right? It's you run a business, you've got to make these decisions, right? And if you don't fire people, then the whole company could go out of business and everybody's going to lose their job. You have to maintain an efficient company because you have competitive pressures. Your customers want low prices, and that means you have to keep your costs down, and that includes your labor costs. But what they did in this UK bill is they had a training period where if you hired somebody I don't remember how long, maybe it was 30 days, maybe it was 90 days, but you had like a free look, right? I'm going to hire somebody, and, you know, if I don't like the way they work out, I'm going to fire them, right? Because I don't know, right? You never know, especially with an entry-level job. You know, you're giving somebody a chance. You don't know. You have an interview. You hope the guy does a good job, the gal does a good job, but you're not really sure. All right, let me hire him and see how you do. After 30 days, you know, it's no good. I'm gonna let you go, right? Well, now, so if you hire somebody and you fire them on the first day, they do such a lousy job that you fire them right away, they can still sue you for wrongful termination. They took away the trial period where you get, you know, to evaluate somebody. So now, if I know, gee, if I hire this guy and they do a lousy job the first couple of days, I can't fire him without getting sued. I ain't going to hire him, right? It makes it less likely that you're going to hire somebody if you can't get rid of them, if it's a bad hire. You know, the harder you make it to fire people, the less likely they're going to get hired in the first place, right? Because the minute you hire somebody, you're taking on all this risk of firing them. You know, they did the same thing with leave. Family leave, not just sick leave, but, you know, family leave. Like, hey, my wife just had a baby, I'm taking leave, right? In the UK, there was, again, a period of time that you had to be employed at a job before you could take advantage of leave. Now, depending on how long you worked there, some of the leave was paid, some of the leave was unpaid, but you had to be there for a particular length of time. Well, this Bill of Rights now got rid of that and said that you can take a family leave on the first day of the job. So you could go to an employer who needs somebody, right? An employer is hiring somebody because they need somebody to do a particular job. So you could show up at that interview and you could say, yeah, I'm your guy. I could do this job. Here's my resume. I really want this job. I'm your guy. Hire me over somebody else. And so let's say the boss hires that guy. The guy can come in the first day on the job and say, all right, you know what? I'm taking a year off. Save my job. I'll be back in a year. And now you're stuck. You just hired the guy and he's taking a year off. Now what are you going to do? I mean, because now you can't really hire somebody else, because you got to tell that person it's a temporary job, because I got to fire you because I got to bring back this guy a year from now who I just hired. I never would have hired him had he told me he was going to take a year off from day one. Now, you don't qualify for paid leave, right? But you could take the leave, and the employer has to keep your spot. He has to take you back a year later, which is very disruptive to his business. And to me, it's like fraud. If you take a job and don't tell your boss that you're going to take a 1 year leave, because you get up to 52 weeks, it's like you've just got somebody holding your place at a job. They give all these rights to workers. Workers don't have these special rights just because they have a job, right? Employers don't lose rights because they hire somebody and they become an employer. Look, in the UK, I checked the laws, and you got to give your boss a week notice in most occasions if you're going to quit. But if you've been working at the job for less than 30 days, you don't have to give any notice at all. You just quit whenever you want. And the boss can't fire you because you quit, and can't say, wrongful quitting, so a lot of times if you're a small employer and somebody leaves, that's very disruptive. I mean, it could be a key person that you really need. And you may have spent a lot of time training this guy, spent some money, and then they just leave you high and dry and you're struggling. Maybe the employer has to do the job himself until he can find somebody else and train somebody else to do it. So oftentimes it's a lot worse for the employer when somebody quits than it is for the employee when they get fired, right? Because in many cases, it could be a lot easier for the employee to get another job. In fact, a lot of times when an employee quits, he's already got another job, right? So it's no big deal. I found a better job. I'm out of here, right? the employer can't sue that guy, right? I mean, unless there's an employment contract, but we're talking about at-will employees, which is most of the case. That the employee can quit whenever they want, and for whatever reason they want, including, they could quit because they don't like the gender or the sexual orientation or the race of their boss. There's nothing about that. I mean, you can't fire somebody because of their race, but you can quit a job because you don't like your boss's race. I mean, that's not there, right? So you got all the cards when it comes to the law when you're a employee, and you lose all of your rights when you become an employer, which is the opposite of what government policy should do. It's hard enough to start a business. You don't want to complicate it by turning employers into villains and creating so many legal clubs that the workers could use against their bosses. That makes it much less likely that companies form, that companies hire, that companies expand, that companies train. But it's great at the ballot box. It plays right into the voters. I mean, a lot of voters, don't like their jobs because they'd rather not have them, right? And maybe they don't like their boss because the boss makes them come to work on time, right? It's like he's the authority figure in their life. Maybe they resent the fact that the boss drives a nicer car and the boss has more money. And maybe they don't think the boss works very hard. But in most cases, the boss is the hardest worker at the company, right? And the boss is the one that takes all the risks. I mean, people forget about this. The entrepreneur, he doesn't get a salary. He may not get anything. He only gets what's left over. Everybody else gets paid. The workers get paid. The landlord get paid. You borrowed money. The interest gets paid. Everything gets paid. The owner only gets paid if there's anything left over. And if there's nothing left over, he gets nothing. If there's a loss left over, he reaches into his pocket. He takes out a loan against his house. He dips into his savings. The workers don't have to do that. They don't have to kick in any money. They get paid, profit or loss, rain or shine. They show up, they get paid. The unsung heroes are the entrepreneurs, are the business owners. And those are the ones who are under attack by laws like the Workers' Bill of Rights, right? Which violate the rights of the employers who are also workers. I like, they talk about workers as if the boss doesn't work. He just sits back and the money just rolls in. He doesn't have to do anything. No, they're often the hardest workers at the company. Anyway, that's it for today's podcast. I am off tomorrow morning for the New Orleans investment conference. It's not going to be like that Bitcoin conference that they had in Nashville with over 20,000 people. There maybe be about 500 or 600 of us. This is the 50th anniversary of the New Orleans Investment Conference. It's the oldest gold conference, I think, continuous conference in the United States. And it's still very small, nothing like what you saw with Bitcoin. But I will be there for the next few days. And I look forward. I got a couple of reps coming down with me. We have a booth from Euro Pacific Asset Management. So if you happen to be there, stop by, talk to the guys. I'm doing a workshop. I got my keynote talk. I think I'm on a panel. And then I'm back. And then, of course, next week we have the Thanksgiving week. And I'll be doing my podcasts remotely. But I'm going to try to do one more podcast. I come back from New Orleans on Saturday, and then we leave on Sunday for our Thanksgiving break. So on that few hours, I'm back here in my studio. I'm going to try to do one more podcast. Anyway, that's it. If you like the podcast, make sure and give it the thumbs up or the like, add a comment. And again, don't forget, sign up for the free newsletter at schiffsovereign.com. Bye for now.